The coronavirus pandemic has generated new racial disparities, whether in health or the economy. That also applies to relief efforts by the federal government, especially a leading program to help small businesses, the Paycheck Protection Act. Some groups in Boston have been trying to plug the gaps in relief with local initiatives, but they're still pushing for more help from Washington and the State House. To tell us about those efforts and why they're needed is the executive director of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, Segun Idowu. Thank you very much for being with us, Segun.
Happy to be here, Chris.
Segun, it was a few weeks ago you did a survey on how the businesses you represent are handling what's going on with the pandemic. What did you find?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. About almost a month ago now, more than a month ago, we sent a survey out to our members right at the beginning of this crisis. This is before the state shut down, before everything got to a point where we are today, and wanted to understand how this is impacting our businesses, because as has often been repeated now, when America catches a cold, the Black community catches pneumonia. And so the results of that survey, we surveyed about 300 of our members, found that at least 90% of our members at that time already were experiencing a somewhat severe financial impact, that over 60% of our members either had reserves to last up to 90 days, if at all, and that over 40% of them at that time felt that they would have to lay off their employees in order to try to survive through the crisis. And this was almost now 2 months ago. So we know that that number has risen immensely.
What about the cross section of businesses you represent? Because I know some of these are businesses that we would recognize passing the storefronts in neighborhood business districts and maybe more idle than they were before, like in other business districts. But what about some of the other businesses?
Yeah, so we have a good mix of businesses across the state of Massachusetts. These range from the storefronts that you mentioned and could be in areas like hair care, personal care services, or restaurants. But we also have a number of online businesses and some corporate type businesses as well that work in security, or even food businesses who deliver food, things like that. So we have a good mix of businesses across the state.
Well, of course, the big story that we were putting a lot of hope in was help for small businesses from the federal government. And this, of course, is coming from the Paycheck Protection Program. How has that worked out so far in Boston for the businesses you represent?
Yeah, I know that it's been very much of a struggle for our businesses to participate in this program. I mean, there are a couple of things you have to consider, especially when it comes to a loan. So two things when it comes to particularly Black-owned businesses in the Black community. When we hear loan, we automatically shut off. There is a history of predatory lending practices in our community. So when we think about loans, we remember that history and how loans have kept us further in debt and has kind of stagnated our wealth. At the same time, there's also a history of racist banking practices where banks won't do lending to us. They won't give us business loans. So when the Paycheck Protection Program became available about almost a month ago, a lot of our business members were not able to participate because they did not have a lending relationship with the bank that they're with. And banks were only doing these loans with folks who had taken out loans in the past. So even though some banks opened up over time to allow folks to get in line, it was already too late. There was a report I read earlier that said that the first $349 billion was gone within a matter of minutes across the country because of how many people signed up in that time. So, for us, we know that we were left out of the first round of this. And there is a lot of concern that we're going to be left out of this second round that just became available through Congress. So we're working with a number of technical assistance providers and other banks to make sure that we are in line for this money this go round.
Well, a lot of us oversimplify the program as forgivable loans from the federal
Yes.
government. As you pointed out, the relationship with banks is crucial. And of course, you also have the issues here of documentation
Right.
and risk taken on by banks. What about, and also conditions for getting those loans forgiven? How does that add up for businesses?
Yeah, I mean, again, when folks see a loan, a lot of, two things happen with our community. Either folks didn't participate because of just hearing loan, or we couldn't participate because of systemic barriers. So for those who didn't participate, it was not only hearing loan, but also the process of the application, and having to have certain documents put together. One of the things that we know has been a constant barrier for Black-owned businesses is not whether or not the product we're producing is top quality, not whether or not the service we provide is awesome, but it's really the back office support that we have always needed. We are experts at the business that we're in, but because a lot of us are either sole proprietors or we don't have the necessary capital for a variety of reasons to grow the business and grow the capacity, we're often doing 10 or 12 different jobs to support our businesses, and so don't often have that time to focus on the back office issues like accounting, bookkeeping, human resources, et cetera. So now, when this application for the Paycheck Protection Program came out, it required us to be experts in that field. It required us to essentially have a chief financial officer and an accounting department to ensure that we had all the necessary documents available. So, again, we're working with a number of technical assistance providers to help people put their documents together and make sure that they have a solid application when submitting to their bank. But in terms of the conditions for the loan, in order for it to be forgivable or to essentially turn into a grant, folks have to either rehire staff that they laid off or hire new people for the 8 weeks that the loan is in existence. After they have kept about 75% of that staff on, the SBA will then turn it into what they're calling a forgivable loan, or essentially you won't have to pay it back.
No, it also occurs to me, and this is not exclusively a concern for Black-owned businesses, because you have other types of businesses owned by immigrants. You might have language issues, and you might have people who don't deal with banks. They work more on cash. Are they, I guess, at a disadvantage?
Well, in the first round they were, but in this second round, Congress did take into consideration other lending type platforms like Cash App, like Venmo, et cetera, so that folks whose commerce is going via our phones essentially can participate. So like I am a member of the Cash App. I sometimes might send my mom money or others in my circle. And I know that Cash sent out an email a few days ago saying that we are now giving a routing number and an accounting number to all of the folks on this platform so that you can participate in the Paycheck Protection Program. So at least on that front, people are covered who weren't in the first round. In terms of straight cash, my understanding is that is not possible at the moment. So again, we're working with folks to kind of get onto the system of trading, of having payroll and using some of these other applications that they can take advantage of this program.
What about help from the state government? You need more in some areas?
Yeah, well, right now the state's not doing a whole lot. So I will give credit to Secretary Mike Keneally and the governor and the Mass Growth Capital Corporation, who at the beginning or the outset of this crisis put together a relief program of $10 million. And what we saw was that within 36 hours, they received almost 3,000 applications that expressed a need for $135 million. So they had to shut that program down, but there hasn't been anything put together since. And this was, again, almost a year ago. BECMA joined along with the Mass Association of CDC, Amplify Latinx, and over 80 organizations across the state, on President Spilka and House Speaker Robert DeLeo, to tell them something set aside $150 million that would invest in low-income communities and businesses of color through grants and technical assistance to ensure that we are saving these businesses from ultimate destruction.
Another thing you're looking for is documentation to show what the breakdown is in all these relief efforts. Yes. Why is that important?
It's critically important that we know that the money is getting to the right areas. I mean, just to talk about the federal level for a second, we saw at the very beginning when the Paycheck Protection Program rolled out, that the money was going to people who had resources, and very often to corporations who had an abundance of resources, who had very well-fed rainy day funds for matters like this, who were getting access to $10 or $20 million that could have gone to several hundred small businesses across the country. So, not only did we see that happening, but again, because of the barriers that exist for Black and Brown businesses, we knew in that first round that that money was not going to go to the people who needed it the most. So for us, collecting the data, knowing who is getting this money, how much they're getting, is going to be important for how we build future programs. But it also allows us as an organization and all of our partners to target areas that are not receiving this help so that we know who best to provide these resources to.
Well, Segun, one of the things that you're always doing is trying to help businesses with problems or questions. So if they have either of those, is there some way they can contact the council?
Yes. So, we are asking folks to reach out to us via email. The email is info@becma.org or info@becma.org. We have a team that are fielding all of the emails coming in right now. We have a whole bunch, particularly since the Paycheck Protection Program went live earlier, who are helping to answer questions or to redirect folks to our team of technical assistance providers and banks who are open to receiving new customers for this program.